After Jocko Willink released his best-selling book, Extreme Ownership, he and Leif Babin received thousands of emails talking about all the success that they'd had by applying those principles into their lives. However, they also received many emails of people talking about how it didn't work. At first, Jocko and Leif were a little confused, but they then realized that people were taking extreme ownership to the extreme. So how is this possible? Jocko understood that any good leadership trait can be taken too far, and when that happens, it can actually be harmful instead of helpful. Because of this, Jocko and Leif published their second book, The Dichotomy of Leadership, to help people learn how to balance some of the most difficult leadership traits. Starting off with extreme ownership. Extreme ownership means taking responsibility for everything that affects you and your team. It does not mean doing everything yourself. Micromanaging is an ineffective way to lead people because it doesn't allow your team members to take initiative for the project. It also takes up all your time and energy away from focusing on the mission because you're too engraved into the details. On the flip side, if you become too hands-off, then people become lazy, lack direction, and start thinking outside of the mission. As a leader, you need to give your team direction, guidance, and correction. But at the same time, they need to have the freedom to act within the boundaries that you have set. That way they can take ownership and learn to lead. Now as a leader, you only have a certain amount of leadership capital that can be used to give directions and make decisions. This capital is earned through the trust and confidence that your team has in you. And because there's a finite amount of it, you need to use your capital to keep high standards for things that truly matter. For example, if you give an order that people can't keep their personal belongings at their desks, that order will take leadership capital away from you in such a way that next time you give an important order or some counsel, your team may not listen to you or understand the importance of it. So be resolute in things that matter and flexible in things that don't. Being the leader of a team gives you the responsibility to maximize the performance of every team member. If someone is underperforming, it is your responsibility to do everything possible to help them to improve. This means mentoring, counseling, giving them training, changing their position, and anything you can think of to help them to succeed. Unfortunately, and very rarely, there will be a team member who is unable to perform at the necessary level. In this rare situation, it is your job as a leader to prioritize the team and the mission over the individual member, which unfortunately means firing them. Only do this if you've tried everything in your power to help them improve, but they are still performing at a level that endangers themselves, the other team members, or the mission. Now let's talk about training. When you're training your team, you should train them hard enough that they're able to grow and improve, but not so hard that they get overwhelmed and aren't able to. For example, this is Pookie. He wants to start working out to get in good shape for the summer. However, if the training is too easy, then his body won't get stronger and he won't get the desired results. On the other hand, if his training is too difficult, then he'll get overwhelmed, could get injured, and not get the results he wants. In order to be effective for your team, training should be difficult, repetitive, realistic, and build upon the basics. Now here's the thing. The problem with being a leader is that you have to take care of problems. And the problem with problems is that they tend to get out of hand unless they're handled immediately. So, your mindset for problem solving should be default aggressive. What this means is being proactive, making quick, informed decisions, and getting things done. What default aggressive does not mean is getting angry, losing your temper, or being aggressive to the members of your team. Point your aggression to solving the problem and completing the mission. But be careful, don't become reckless under the pretense of being default aggressive. Take the time to think things through, accept wise counsel, and see what's really happening. Remember, act, don't react. Having disciplined processes and procedures give leaders and teams freedom by providing guidance on what to do in certain circumstances. However, the processes and procedures can't account for every single situation. Therefore, if they're too rigid, then they can prevent your ability to think through different situations. So, have disciplined processes, but give them the flexibility to be altered to fit in different scenarios. When you're a leader, everybody tells you to hold people accountable. You have to hold people accountable. You need to hold people accountable. Holding people accountable is a good tool to use as leader, but it's just a tool. If you spend too much time holding people accountable, then you stifle their ability to exercise extreme ownership, and you lose your ability to focus in other important areas. This brings up the question, when should you hold people accountable? The answer is to use this tool when people are underperforming and you're trying to help them to improve. In general though, it's better to help your team understand what the purpose is behind something and then trust them to follow through. For example, it would help me if you hit the subscribe button so that I can have more subscribers than Jake from State Farm. That way, I could upgrade to being a successful nerd rather than just a nerd. To summarize, use accountability when it's needed and spend the rest of the time leading. Leaders need to take charge and make decisions. At the same time, leaders should make these decisions while following the expertise, advice, and ideas of all the members of the team, so long as it's best for the mission. If you force your way every time because you're the leader and you said so, then you will be seen as weak. However, if you make a decision that is best for the team, even if it isn't your own idea, then you'll be seen as a strong leader. Being a leader can boost your ego to unhealthy levels if you aren't careful. Therefore, be sure to be humble in your position. This means not thinking yourself above others, being disrespectful, and following orders from up the chain of command. But just as it's easy to be too prideful as a leader, it's just as easy to become passive as a leader. Remember, there are times when you need to push back against an order. This is when an order could be harmful to your team. This, however, is rare because your leaders are on the same side as you are. When this does happen, stand up for the safety of your team. But remember, this is the exception, not the rule. Planning is a critical part of leading. While you're planning, take time to consider possible scenarios so that your team can be prepared. But don't go too far. If you overplan, then you risk overwhelming your team and causing confusion because they will be trying to remember every detail, which will make it harder for them to make decisions in the moment. On the other hand, don't underplan. Underplanning typically happens because of overconfidence and laziness during the planning process. If you don't plan for enough scenarios, then your team won't know what to do when, not if, something goes wrong. Leaders need to understand the details of the mission, but if they get too focused on the details, then they can lose sight of the mission. When this happens, mistakes will be made and you will move off course. Therefore, you must be detached enough to see what's going on around you, but not so detached that you don't know what's happening on the front lines. To illustrate this point, Leif uses the example of a scope on a gun. A scope enables you to focus on the details of what you're aiming at, but if you're looking down the scope, then you can't see what's happening around you. As leader, trust your team on the front lines to look down the scope and tell you what they see. That way you can watch what's happening and tell them where to aim. Now it's time to talk about the greatest test as a leader. You have to care about the members of your team individually and at the same time accept the risks necessary to carry out the mission. You have to develop strong relationships with the members of your team, but if you care about them too much, then you won't be able to take the necessary risks. Throughout the book, Jocko talks about the love for his men that he led in Iraq. Each one of those missions that he sent them on were dangerous, but if he had let the love that he had for his men distract him from completing the goal, he would have never sent them out on those missions that were critical for ending the war. On the flip side, if a leader cares more for the mission than his men, then he will take unnecessary risks that won't bring any extra advantage. This will cause his team to lose respect for him and they won't follow his leadership. As a leader, there is an infinite number of dichotomies that need to be balanced. So to keep it simple, any good attribute that a leader needs can be taken too far. And when that happens, it turns into a negative one. So you must use extreme ownership to find balance in your leadership. But what is extreme ownership? Watch this video to find out. And remember, we're not a cult.